Good evening. I'd like to call the special meeting of the City Council to order.
And yes, I would like to call the special meeting of the Planning Commission to order at 5:02.
City Clerk, roll call, please.
Councilmember Martin,
Here.
Councilmember Mora.
Here.
Councilmember Sarno. Absent. Mayor Pro Tem Zamora,
Here.
Mayor Rodriguez,
Here.
Mark Frescas,
Present.
Johnny Hernandez. Absent. Commissioner Rounds,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Carbajal,
Here.
and Chair Jimenez.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move to public comments. Public comments are now open. Anyone joining us through Zoom can use the raise hand function if you wish to make a public comment on item number 4. The city clerk will see if you have raised your hand through the Zoom application. For those that are here to make public comments in person, you will have the opportunity once the city clerk announces your name. You will have 3 minutes to speak. Staff will respond to any questions after everyone from the public has had an opportunity to speak. City clerk, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak today?
Madam Mayor, we don't have any speakers today.
Thank you. I will now close public comments. Study session item number 4, Objective Development Standards Project, a presentation by the consulting firm ACOM about creating multi-unit and mixed-use objective development standards and streamlined permitting processes to increase capacity potential and accelerate housing production within the city of Santa Fe Springs. I would like to call on Assistant Director of Planning, Quang Nguyen.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Rodriguez, members of the City Council, and members of the Planning Commission. So tonight we have a brief presentation for you from our consultant who is assisting us with the Objective Development Standards Project. The objective of tonight's study session is to provide you with a general overview and understanding of objective design standards and how it can be used to help streamline the process and help facilitate the housing production in Santa Fe Springs. As you may already know, in March of 2020, SCAG adopted its 6th cycle housing element. And as part of that was a regional housing needs assessment allocation plan and a requirement for Santa Fe Springs to plan for 952 housing units. The plan covers the planning period from October 2021 and ends in October of 2029. So the need as well as the mandate to produce more housing has prompted cities, including Santa Fe Springs, to review residential development standards to make them simpler to understand and easier to implement. So resulting in hopefully faster permitting timelines and potentially accelerating housing production. Cities are updating and adding to the regulations to create production standards to be more objective as opposed to subjective. So with that said, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ashley Huang from AECOM, who will be providing tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Quang, and good evening, Mayor, council members, and commissioners. As Quang said, I'm Ashley Huang. I'm the project manager for AECOM. So I will go through this brief presentation and we'll have a period at the end for you to discuss, ask any questions. All right, we'll kick it off. So we'll just do a brief project overview and an understanding of the regulatory framework, so on the state level, and then local policies as well. And then taking a look at reimagining the city's development tools. This is, what the project is about, looking at the applications and then the city's existing standards to make them more objective. So as Kwong mentioned, this project is funded by the Southern California Association of Governments, and the point is really to document, assess, and modernize multi-unit and mixed-use objective development standards, and then also look at how we can support streamlining the entitlement and permit processes. And the way that SCAG did some of these projects is to bundle them between cities. So in addition to Santa Fe Springs, this project also serves Montebello, Santa Monica, and South Pasadena. And so we're really here to support a greater understanding of why objective development standards matter and what their role is in accelerating housing production, and to support the city with developing those standards and streamlining their processes. So we're here because there's housing challenges in California, not new news. Housing supply, of course, has continued to not keep up with demand. This is because of several reasons. One is that in the past, general plan and housing program implementation has been weak across the state in many cities. Development standards impact supply and cost, especially when they are subjective. Permitting processes at times do have multiple levels of discretionary review, which can extend project timelines. And there can be community resistance to new affordable housing in higher densities. So we just wanted to take a brief moment to highlight the housing element rezoning project and then the objective development standards project. So there's two separate projects. The housing element rezone, I know you're all very familiar with. The deadline for the project is October 22, and it's establishing and adopting all the new zoning districts per the housing element, and also preparing some standards for the new zones, including things like lot area, width, depth, and coverage. Whereas the objective development standards project has a longer project timeline going through June 2023. So essentially, we'll be creating what SCAG is calling a toolkit of objective development standards for city staff to then take and bring before you all to consider for any amendments going forward. And the standards mainly will be addressing the form and site planning, including things like massing and frontage and public realm, and then clarifying any existing standards as needed. So just a couple of project engagement milestones. So this is our first public touch point on the project. And then tomorrow night, we have our first public workshop right back here in this room. And then we'll have a little bit of a gap until the second workshop, which will be in January 2023. And then the final presentations to City Council and Planning Commission in the spring of 2023. And that'll be to review all of the draft deliverables from the project. So jumping into the regulatory framework at the state level, just to kind of provide a little context. So California has to plan for 2.5 million homes in the next 8-year cycle that Kwong mentioned. And California has seen some very slight population declines, but the LA area has grown by about 2% in the last decade. So housing construction continues to lag behind demand, leading to supply and cost issues. And no surprise, California housing has become some of the most expensive in the nation. And especially for renters, over half of renters spend more than 30% of their household income on housing. And there's been a lot of recent legislation around housing over the last several years, one of which is Senate Bill 167, or the Housing Accountability Act. And this says that cities can't deny, reduce the density of, or make housing development projects infeasible. And then SB 35 passed in 2018, so it really focuses on streamlining affordable housing. And this one says that housing development projects in cities that fail to meet their RHNA goals must process on a ministerial basis, and then it breaks it down by income level based on moderate or very low and low income projects. And then SB 330, or the Housing Crisis Act, essentially allows developers to submit a preliminary housing development application, and it reduced the overall project review period from 120 to 90 days. And it was recently extended through 2030. And I won't go through all of these, but this slide is just to highlight that there's been a slew of other bills that have passed in the last few years. And this is also just a handful. I think it's 40 plus at this point, different bills that have come through related to housing on the state level that cities are grappling with across the state. So local policies, one of the first things that we did for the project was to look at the city's existing local policies and regulations. And so that included a high-level analysis of looking at things like policy documents, the existing development standards and regulations, permit procedures. And so we prepared a report that assesses these things and then provided findings and recommendations. So it looked at, design guidelines, the general plan, the land use and housing element and policies, the code, planning and building applications. We also looked at projects that were recently approved to understand what the current permitting timeline looks like and any factors that tend to extend that process. And then looked at multi-unit and mixed use permit applications. And the city currently has no existing mixed use zone and one multi-unit residential zone in the multifamily R3. Of course, with the housing element, several new zones were approved, like high density residential, mixed use downtown, and mixed use transit-oriented development. So the table just shows some of like the key standards that are included in the R3 zone. And so the report includes findings and recommendations related to applications, permit review, and the standards. So first we looked at applications, and some of the recommendations were things like making the forms fillable online, standardizing the forms, especially those that are used most often, adding an overview page for each permit type, revising forms to identify things that are like general, supplemental, or optional components, creating a process guide, including a really clear fee schedule, and then, over time, of course, continuing to integrate these things over time to continually improve the process. And then around permit review, the city could explore administrative permit review levels to further streamline, and that would be in accordance with the Housing Accountability Act and other legislation, limiting discretionary actions. And so it would potentially create more certainty, less cost, shorter timelines in the process. And then establishing a review and approval process to streamline, especially the multi-unit and mixed-use development projects that this project is looking at, and especially when they comply with objective development standards. And then also having objective findings for those types of projects when they are subject to discretionary permit review. And then recommendations around standards. So looking at the building height in multi-unit zones, revisiting standards for things like lot area, lot width, and depth, reducing or eliminating potentially some setbacks and lot coverage to allow for a larger building envelope, revisiting the minimum distance between buildings that may be potentially more appropriate for the distance between single family buildings, but maybe not necessarily for multi-unit or higher density. And then looking at parking and potentially, especially where parking constrains development. And the next thing we did was look at a handful of projects that are currently being reviewed to understand how the existing standards are being interpreted and applied across the existing process. So this is just a handful that we looked at. And so first, looking at recommendations, you'll see there's some duplication here between looking at, recently approved projects and projects currently under review. So one thing is that sometimes there are duplicative permits for multifamily housing. So the city could consider combining permits to streamline the process. Currently, multi-unit residential requires planning commission discretionary review at a notice of public hearing. So you could consider expanding the threshold for administrative actions. And then the regular use of zoning tools like variances or use permits may indicate an opportunity to create more standardization and certain objectives. So you could consider building flexibility into those standards, or also through the approval of only one discretionary permit through combining them. And then standards themselves. So again, parking requirements, especially those that constrain development, could be reconsidered, especially those that'll be approximate to transit. Creating flexible parking standards like avoiding minimums, allowing alternative parking solutions like shared parking. And then, the city wants to establish guest parking standards. Another is to consider reducing setback requirements, which we saw in the first report, to allow increased density, but also with all of the industrial uses here, making sure that that takes neighboring sensitive land uses into account. And then this is something that we'll focus on in developing the standards, is providing them in a table format, especially including graphics to help illustrate the standards, and use clear and measurable language to make it easy to understand and implement. So moving towards reimagining the city's tools, first looking at the development permit approval application. So we, in this project, are going to create one new permit form focused on multi-unit mixed-use housing development, to make sure that the form is, serves city staff and applicants in the best way possible, to make sure that it's clear and the process is streamlined. So we held a staff study session already and got some great feedback on the existing applications. Again, like making the applications fillable, including how to submit and contact information, updating outdated information, including things like flow chart, and updating things like the number of copies that is different from what's on the application now. Integrating, like there's an old scanned hazardous waste information form that we'll recreate and make it so that it's also PDF and fillable. There's some information that's for city use only. And so taking away anything, that the applicant's not going to fill out, so that they don't even have to look at it and get confused potentially. And then add directions on which projects may require things like a notarized signature or further environmental information, especially for industrial land uses. So when looking at the standards that we'll be developing for zones in Santa Fe Springs, this project includes developing standards for up to 4 multi-unit and mixed-use zones. And the way that we scoped that out is that 2 of those will be completely unique to Santa Fe Springs, and 2 will be common between all 4 cities in the bundle. And like I said before, will be supported by diagrams to make them easy to understand and implement. So for Santa Fe Springs, the zones that we're looking at are unique ones, are high density residential and mixed use TOD, potentially switching that to mixed use. We've heard and know from staff that there's more of an urgency around the mixed use areas. And then the common would be medium density residential and one of those mixed use. And really the main difference between the unique and the common typologies is that city staff in all of the cities may have to make more tweaks to the common typologies based on local considerations, whereas the unique typologies will really make sure that are really detailed out and are very specific to each city. So at the staff study session on the standards, a couple of things we heard is that the interplay between building layout and parking is important, especially like how someone walking by, how you experience the parking from the street. The focus should be on design-oriented standards, and that we should look at relaxing parking standards in the rezoning project, and that can also inform the objective development standards on things like siting, blocking views, and things like that. So our goal here tonight is to introduce the project to you, go over some of these basics, but then also hear from you any early thoughts on any ideas you have around improving the housing permit application, and then also any ideas around the multi-unit and mixed-use standards. So we have this slew of questions. They're prompts. We can use them, but we can also just have a dialogue and discussion and hear any thoughts. So it's probably from a decision maker's perspective, you may not have as much experience around the application and using the application, but I know a lot of folks may be practitioners. There may be applications you've used doing your work or in other cities that there could be things to learn from. Maybe you've heard in the community people expressing frustrations with the application process or the form itself that would be helpful for us to know to inform the work. So basically, like anything that's not working, and also what really is working, to make sure that we keep it, improve on it, things like that around the applications. And then for the standards, from your perspective, it'd be really helpful to understand what kind of building and development you want to see in the new multi-unit and mixed-use areas, and what you've heard in the community that the community wants to see as well. So like, should we be looking at townhomes or small apartment buildings? Does it matter on which part of the city we're looking at or talking about? Also, something that could be helpful is, are there certain standards that you hear about all the time at your meetings on projects that tend to typically come up a lot, that cause a lot of conversation? Those are ones where there's potential opportunity. If we can make it a little bit more standard or easy to interpret, maybe it'll help in that process. And then any standards that tend to work especially well, which may not be as obvious because you probably don't hear about them as often. If they're working well, then they're probably not a big talking point at approval meetings. So there's the kind of points of feedback where it'd be great to hear from you. And then also, it's an opportunity to ask any questions about the project or anything that we presented. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And does the council or commission have any questions or feedback?
Madam Mayor, I do. So what we're gonna, the end result is, with everything that's going on, we need to make it easier, to make it more efficient, to have garages converted into all that, make the application easier. My question is that we all know people, neighbors or so, that have converted the garages into apartments that they rent out.
Mm-hmm.
Are we gonna have a process, since, do we know if they're safe? Do we know if they're, of course, if they have no permits, we don't know how safe they are. Are we gonna make it somewhere so we can have those people that have those illegal garages and stuff? Could we make it a process for them to come and get the permits easier? So at least we know that the people in there are safe. So I mean, because I mean, it's kind of going backwards, but at least we know it's safe. And so my concern is, people are going to do it that have done it already, because it's such a hassle to do it. But could we make it some of a process to make those people that already have done it, make it easier, kind of grandfather them in? Is there a process that we can do that also?
Well, I'll start, but I might ask Kwong to speak to it too, because this project, I think you'd probably find that a little bit less in the standards that we're developing, because it's not going to touch on single family housing at all, which I think is more where you see that type of happen where someone will convert, the space above their garage into a unit or convert their garage to a unit potentially without permits. So we may not see it as much here, but yeah.
Just to let you guys know too, remember we did have 2 workshops for ADUs. So that is something that the fact that our planning department is looking ahead and, providing some kind of outreach to help individuals. So that does help out. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, just to make it, those people that have, and, we just to get them up and just, I think the main concern is making sure whatever they've done, not them to be afraid to come. And so everything's done correctly for the residents living in there.
So Councilmember Martin, we are currently in simultaneously with the objective development standards. We did also receive a SCAG grant to work on the ADU standards. So the objective design standards is focusing more on the medium density mixed use component, whereas the ADU will be concentrating on the single family ADU component.
Thank you.
I got a question regarding the mixed use and multi-unit. So it seems like the setbacks are getting kind of smaller. Is that a problem? Like, I'm talking about for neighbors and stuff like that, when we build, are we gonna have bigger setbacks so that we're away from? Yeah, go ahead, Quan.
So currently, we are working with MIG, who is our general plan consultant, to coordinate the development of new standards for our mixed use zones and also have it line up with the objective design standards. We don't have standards yet for mixed use, but the standards will consider impacts to adjacent neighbors, especially if they're residential.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Just another thing real quick. I noticed that you guys use the city of Santa Monica. Are you guys aware what's happening in Santa Monica when it comes to their arena numbers?
Yes, they have.
So why did we use them here?
Well, so the way that SCAG set up these projects is for any city could apply for
Yeah.
any of the projects that they had through this program. And so this happened, I think, with the ADU grant as well, where they just bundled the cities that applied and got approved for the projects, even if they're like wildly different in some aspects. So I'm not sure who's in your ADU bundle, but like we're working on another one as well that has Santa Monica, Laguna Beach. And so there are, it's a balance of providing the funding to the cities and then figuring out how to create efficiencies between them when there's, maybe some similarities, but also a lot of differences.
Just to let you guys know, what's taking place in Santa Monica is they met the arena numbers and they were penalized. So it's like, I feel bad for that city because here they did everything they could, yet it's difficult for them to find any other housing. I think they have to put in like over 8,000 housing units. So, that's the only reason why I brought up Santa Monica, because it's we're supposed to know about, when they bring up cities, I would hope they would also give us the backlog of what's happening. So, but I feel bad for the city of Santa Monica because yet they met their arena numbers and yet they were penalized a substantial amount. And so I just think that, for us, when we move forward with this, with mixed use projects, who's to say we're not going to be penalized?
I don't know if that's something that you all have talked about with HCD, but we won't be, the amount of arena numbers, right? It informs the zones and the standards that have been developed, but we really won't be dealing with any meeting arena as a part of this project.
Good. And then too, just to let you know, when it comes to housing, we have to look at it case by case, if I'm not mistaken, Wayne, because what happens is then we get into lawsuits, and I think you guys are all aware, anytime you change your, for housing, your codes, you could do it case by case, but when it comes to a whole different ordinance, then that's where lawsuits take place. And I think I did talk to you before about that, Wayne, that we just got to be careful when it comes to that. So just letting you guys know, we just have to be careful and start looking at each case more as a case by case. So if not, then we can talk to different housing experts to help us out besides yourselves. And I do believe that I mentioned one of the names. I think Juanita and I heard her out in a conference, and I forgot what was her last name was Hernandez, I think it was. Yeah, so it's okay.
ICA has information.
Yeah, so we'll go from there if you guys don't mind.
All right, I also had a question. Are you, is this so that we can make things easier to do business with filling out the forms? Are you asking us what our ideas are about how we can make it easier to get permits and applications? I agree. I like the idea about filling out the forms online. I didn't know that we didn't have that, but I like that. And I just want to be easy to do business with. So filling out forms online, getting the permits done faster. I know that in the past we've had consultants, and that's what a lot of our industrial residents said that they were waiting on because the consultant hasn't come here to do their job or similar things like that. So what are we going to do now in order to make it easier to do business with regarding applications and permits? You're preparing the process?
Yeah, so we'll be preparing one housing development permit application form with the goal of, making it as fast as we can, as easy to understand, so that there's potential, hopefully less confusion on the applicant side of things, less questions to staff because it's been explained clearly. Things like identifying which information is needed for which types of projects, so that someone looking through it could easily be like, all right, I'm not doing that, cross that whole section off. So things like that, just to make it a lot more clear from the applicant side of things. And then also, to help with staff time as well, to make it easier and faster on their end.
Yeah, and we don't know the whole process of if I wanted to start a business here, what steps do we have to take? I don't know if somebody comes in here and they have an appointment and somebody sits down with them and explains the process. So I think my idea too would be to have that in the process where somebody discusses what it is that they need and how they are able to obtain the information they need for what we require.
I think just a spin off of that, maybe we can do like some kind of a how-to video. So instead of having people just dedicate certain time, then at least having a video of what are the steps that they got to go through. I mean, we all have used YouTube plenty of times to fix things or to do different things around the house. So I think just having some kind of how-to video and, the process where people can look at that, maybe even go over that first, kind of like a rental, almost like a renter's agreement. But you have something where they have to go over the information first, watch the video. So then it makes it easier. So a lot of their questions would already be answered in that. And of course, if we can make that bilingual or trilingual, whatever it may be with the different nationality groups that we work with, we do have, our business community is a diverse community. So.
And it would be great too to put that in the chamber too. So when they go to the chamber,
Yeah,
everybody be
exactly.
connected again.
Yeah, so I think just that would be make it easier, especially if they see it first,
That is a great idea. It eliminates somebody having to sit there. You just go and watch the video, and some people don't even want somebody to sit there. They just want to watch the video and get the knowledge and see how it's done.
Just a couple comments. We do have a lot of fillable forms on our website that's already there. I'm not saying that it's 100%, but the majority of forms are fillable. With respect to the video, that's not really the scope of their task. At this point, maybe that's something that we could do as an adjunct to something else. So that is something certainly that we could look at. But in terms of the task and the deliverables, it's actually the discussion centering around what is on the screen to try to solicit some feedback. With respect to the business license, Madam Mayor, and understanding the process, we do have a specific section on the city's website right now that Kwong and his staff has done what I think is an excellent job of explaining and illustrating from step one. How do you obtain a business license? What is the step? And it's quite illustrated. So those are some of the things that we already have in place right now.
Okay, good, good.
Thank you, Wayne.
I think that video is really good too, that we could work on that. Good, all right. Are there any other questions?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Just a couple comments. And this is probably for both the housing and the multi-use. There was a slide up there about relaxing some of the parking restrictions and whatnot. Parking is a major concern for me, and I know a lot of other people, especially with the ADUs that was mentioned before, to eliminate requirements. You know, our city streets are already overcrowded with cars, and both in the residential and the commercial. I know there's commercials that are always coming to us asking for no parking because they don't have any room for their tenants. But I think that's something that should really be looked at before relaxing stuff. What else, you know, how's that going to really affect us? And I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but for the multi-unit and mixed use standards, I don't know if you're looking for suggestions, but not just like townhomes or small apartments, but how about a business on the bottom and a loft on the top, that type of a mixed use. You know, we've talked about that before. I've seen that in other cities. It works very, very well. And I'd like to see something like that put into this.
It's a great comment. I mean, we are looking at mixed use, so we definitely, you know, we'll be having standards that, you know, focus on projects that have ground floor commercial with residential above. And, you know, how can we have design standards that make that commercial use enjoyable from the street perspective, and how that integrates with the residential uses. When we talk about things like reducing standards, you know, that's one of the hardest nuts to crack, you know, in city planning and works. You know, one thing that could work in mixed use, for example, is like a shared parking scenario where you have, you know, office uses or commercial during the day and then residential at night. So it's like you're sharing same kind of parking spaces for different times of day, things like that, but really being thoughtful about where it makes sense, of course.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Do we have any more comments or questions from our council and commissioners?
Thank you.
All right, I would like to adjourn the city council meeting.
I would like to adjourn the planning commission meeting at 5:40.